Great, Matt. That's really helpful and great background, and I'm really looking forward to digging into that more. This is Todd Ablowitz. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Infinicept, and I think our podcast today we're going to talk more about getting into some of the details of what the journey was like, what the mistakes may have been, and unpacking some of the mistakes and some of the good decisions that will help other software platforms when they're evaluating how to deal with payments. And it really, Matt, I don't want this to be about Infinicept. I want this really to be about your journey and about the journey of others that can follow in your footsteps. So let's unpack the early days. You talked about starting with Stripe, and why did you choose to go with Stripe? Let's talk about that decision and what it was like to start up, how it was to work with them, and more about that experience.
Absolutely. So I've got nothing but great things to say about Stripe and in the space they operate in, other than the fact they're really expensive and keep most of the margin for themselves. But they were turnkey PayFac in a box, and I actually know the company that kind of helped them build that they had acquired years ago, and it's a great product, but it works just like any other PayFac product. Now that I've used a few, but they've got sort of this whole API ecosystem. And the reason we started with Stripe was because we were like every other really product company. We were running an experiment. We were running a series of experiments on, could we take a credit card, use our integrations that we have with the point of sales, extend those into actually processing the payment so that we could, sort of streamline the checkout process and connect it to the CRM piece of our ecosystem. And so we had a bunch of product flows, and we didn't want to spend 6 months negotiating a really great contract, but a really long-term high commitment contract. So we started with Stripe because our devs could look at the APIs and kind of turn it on in an hour and start testing things. And so it was great for it delivered on absolutely on that. We were able to get merchants turned on fairly quickly, and we would just board the sort of collect the data Stripe needed and kind of write a few jobs on our back end to actually trigger the payments and do whatever fee calculation needed to be done. And then we scaled and pretty quickly realized this is going to be the right product bet for the long term in terms of building the vision we have of this connected relationship. So we realized we were going to scale up, and then as any well-run company should do, you got to actually think about who your partner is going to be for the long term. So we ran an RFP process. We talked to Stripe, Chase, and I'll tell you, Chase did not treat us well at all. We talked to WePay, who were great. We talked to ProPay. We talked to WorldPay and First Data. And in the process met Infinicept, Finix, Payrix, and the consulting groups associated with each of those groups. And we ran a procurement process, and pretty early on realized that working with Infinicept was going to be helpful, whether we were with Stripe or with any one of these other processors, because Stripe actually had some product and still has some product gaps in this product that they didn't make us aware of when we started, but in particular around risk and who foots the bill for what. So we realized great, and also who gets to keep the underwriting data in case you want to renegotiate your contract and move your merchant somewhere else. You need a platform in addition to Stripe to make sure you can do that. And Stripe wasn't so great and didn't tell us that was going to happen when we started to think about renegotiating, but it's all water under the bridge. They helped us get our beta going and give us the conviction this was a product to build. So then we ran a process with the different processors, ended up picking WorldPay as a primary partner, First Data as a secondary partner, and we're able to have pretty much as turnkey of an experience as we had on Stripe because we had a back office platform. And I like to say we picked the right one because it was my project and I'm a genius. But it really has been a great, and I say that sarcastically for those of you who don't know me, and that I don't really think that way, but it was a great partnership for a couple of reasons. It gave us the technology to be just as turnkey on WorldPay as we had been on Stripe, actually less code we had to write. And like I'd said, I wish I'd had them in front of Stripe too, because it would have saved us a lot of time there. And the second thing it did was gave us all of our underwriting data. So if we ever needed to move off of WorldPay or somewhere else, we actually had the underwriting system of record. We could move around as contract renegotiations can end up leading to that. And then finally, in addition to the software, Infinicept kind of bundles advisory as a service. And that not only helped us get across the 0 to 1 that you need to get the contract done, like to get approval as a payment processor by WorldPay or First Data, but also as we ramped up, we had this sort of expertise that was almost better than hiring some 200K employee in-house to like answer all the questions that maybe the CFO who's never done payments before had, or my CEO and co-founder wants to know, or all these different things about risk, underwriting, merchant verticals, compliance, that we all of a sudden have this software that kind of builds all that logic, and, you know, sort of also the thought partners to help us not shoot ourselves in the foot, and had a great run with it. And, you know, at the end of that negotiation process, we were going to have Infinicept, but the question was, do we use Stripe or do we use WorldPay? And even though the economics were a challenge, what ended up, you know, pushing us off of Stripe in our journey was that we really needed flexible, you know, brick and mortar credit card processing tooling. And I had used they had 2 products at the time that were launching, and we tried both of them out and they didn't fit our use case. And so we couldn't even, at the end of the day, our product team wouldn't even sign off on that, because we needed, you know, we had really specific product flow requirements. And, you know, this might be a surprise to people on the podcast, but actually we had a lot more options and flexibility with the ecosystem we put together with WorldPay than what Stripe was willing or able to do, and frankly declined to extend a similar ecosystem with us.
That's really interesting. I think there are a couple things to unpack in your early days when you were working with Stripe. You mentioned that there were some things about risk that weren't clear. And we've heard this before. What was the surprising thing to you, either about a product gap or a responsibility? Tell us about what that was like when how you realized it, what it meant, et cetera.
Absolutely. So Stripe, like WorldPay plus Infinicept, makes it really easy to automatically create accounts, get merchants set up. But we had always assumed that because they were charging us the same rate that they charge their actual shopping, you know, the merchants who set up like e-commerce shops running Stripe, that like if somebody did a fraudulent charge and wanted, you know, and did a chargeback, that Stripe would manage that, or it would not be on us. They were keeping 2.9 and 30 cents. So, you know, they'll you know, they're going to eat the cost of whatever risk and fraud they let through, you know, because obviously they're the best tech platform, whatever. And we had risk and fraud happen. Oh, and I still remember there was this, you know, a store in LA that had a couple of customers come in and they tried to run it on the primary credit card terminal, didn't work. They didn't want to dip the card. They wanted to swipe it. And so they managed to run some cards on our terminals for multiple couple transactions, like, oh, actually, I forgot to buy this expensive champagne kind of thing. We got, of course, a couple of weeks later, those charges were charged back. And we found out very quickly that Stripe passes all of those fees right back to us. And then we had to, you know, then it is on us to collect the fees from the merchants. And it was not an easy process for a couple of reasons. One, it was just a total surprise that nobody told us that those kind of shields for us in the middle weren't in place, and that 2.9% didn't actually cover any risk behavior. But second surprise was that we had to, you know, still on us to go to the merchant, have the conversation, collect the money, and like trigger the money movement back, just as manual as it would have been with WorldPay. You know, in those days. And now Infinicept's automated some of those flows, but it was a rude awakening. Fortunately, we collected the money back. The merchant was not so happy, and they're not a merchant with us anymore. And it was kind of early days, but there were no guardrails in the system. And the other thing Stripe didn't do was like give us the ability to like do a bunch of logic, like, oh, let's hold these funds from this risky looking transaction. Don't put the funds into the merchant's bank account right away. And had we been able to do that, which is something Infinicept lets us do with our high risk merchants, had in an automated way, had those checks been able to run in an automated way, and we had caught that, we would never have had to go back to the merchant and figure out how are we going to convince this merchant to give us the 9K that they owed us. And so we ended up working through all that, got to a good place, but it was a bit of a trial by fire. And I kind of always felt like we were misled, and that they offered just the same features that the other processors offer and not a bit more of risk or protection, but they don't really advertise it. Whereas when we're talking to WorldPay, they were very upfront of, you're gonna be on the hook for this, this, and this. Do you want to move forward? Well, sure I do. Yeah, or no. But the merchant experience with Stripe or Tilt or any of these other PayFac Lite products, like that merchant experience and the merchant risk is actually identical. And if you look closely, you're probably on the hook yourself just as much as if you were in a contract with WorldPay or First Data. We just found that folks glaze over that part on that side of the world, and it was a bit of a rude surprise. I lost some sleep over that 10K.
So Matt, it sounds to me like, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's not the fact that you would take risk. It's the fact that you know what you're getting into, and that it's clear, and you make a choice to either pay more and not take risk, or pay less and take some risks.
Right.
Am I interpreting that right? And when you think about what it takes to go live with a Stripe Connect or with a provider like that versus becoming a payment facilitator, how different were those things, and how much harder was it to become a payment facilitator?
It's a good question. It took me half an FTE more to do the payment facilitator route. And I'll tell you why. It was easy. And I think it was very easy. We had to do our policies and procedures, but that they looked like just what we would have to do on Stripe anyways to run this business. We just wrote them down, and in fact, Infinicept helped us write them down. But that was easy. That was where that half FTE went, to just like kind of read through it, make adjustments, talk to the experts, be informed. The engineering integration was super easy. We actually did less engineering work for WorldPay because of what Infinicept was able to do with their back office platform than we did for Stripe. So we actually saved and simplified engineering. And then which might be surprising to folks in the audience, it saved and simplified engineering. And especially now with players like Very Good Security coming out with, sort of integrate once, work with any processor, e-commerce or sort of card processing solutions and token vaults, like it's even easier today than it was 3 years ago when we started to like be up and running like that with your engineering folks. So project management or compliance and risk, that was like a half FTE for 6 months. Yeah, we kind of had that person continue to do some housekeeping for the next 12 months. Engineering was easier. Our support tooling was easier because rather than having, and I don't know, folks, you have to really build a bunch of support tooling yourself on top of Stripe, or document how your folks are going to interact with their Connect things. Whereas like Infinicept has a very well, I'm sure they have like that kind of, they've designed it for that underwriting and payment support person to go in and solve merchant problems as they come in. And then finally, one thing we heard a lot was, oh, you're going to have all these support burdens. Well, look, we're running the gateway anyways. And what we found is whether we're actually processing the payment or just the gateway, we have the same amount of support volume, or pretty much the same, except for like bank account changes or like, where's my money calls. And even those calls happen when we're the gateway. So there was actually no increase in core support costs versus when we were on Stripe versus on WorldPay. And the reason for that is when you're delivering the end product, you're going to get the call no matter what. And the more you know and control about what happened under the hood or can access, and Stripe gives you pretty good transparency, but not a lot of tooling. Whereas between WorldPay and Infinicept, we have all that data. We have access to all the raw data, kind of how we did on Stripe, but also I think better tooling. Your folks tend to have to solve it, or at least kick it over to a really, that's been, we've not, people say, oh, you're gonna have to add all the support. Like, actually, we were doing all that support anyway. So I'm just making more money from it now. than when we were doing the support and not making any margin from it.